One of the major criticisms levelled at the Vandenrye Quincy's was simply how un-Quincy-like they felt a lot of the time, and I think this was by design. They explicitly said that they had moved away from some of the older traditions of the Quincy, such as the Let's Steal, but I do think fans were a little bit disappointed to see them rely so heavily on their shrifts in battle, and not so much on traditional Quincy techniques like Ranso Tengai, which we literally saw once. However, that's not to say that they weren't Quincy-like in nature a lot of the time, and a surprising number of them do actually use a bow and arrow in combat, which I think is something that gets overlooked a lot. So here's a quick video, guys, going through every Sternritter in the Vandenrye and checking out whether or not they used a bow. Before we begin though, hit the subscribe button and keep the channel growing. I would really appreciate the support. Let's go. Starting with the big man himself, Yuha. He doesn't actually use a bow per se, but he does use an ability called Sanct Bogen on numerous occasions, which allows him to summon, you guessed it, an enormous bow. And in fact, he uses it in pretty creative ways, such as when he shoots himself in the back with an arrow to send himself back to the royal palace. That's pretty cool. Sternritter A, the antithesis Uryu Ishida, of course uses a bow. Our resident fan favourite Heroic Quincy has been known to use a bow the entire series, and this arc is absolutely no different. Strangely, however, his bow does change shape 3 times. It starts off small, gun-like, much like his father Ryuken's bow. Later on, when he confronts Ichigo, it's longer, it's made of reishi now it seems, and it looks completely different. And then finally, in the battle against Hashwolf, he has a new 4-pronged bow, which looks almost like a star. Sternritter B and the Grand Master of the Sternritter, Jugram Hashwolf, does not use a bow. And this is explained by the fact that he can't actually use Quincy abilities. As far as we know, he has no power to create and collect reishi himself. Sternritter C, Pernod Pankajaz, does use a bow, and in fact actually uses quite a lot of them. The left arm of the Soul King is able to generate bows on the tips of its fingertips, and then fire them all at the same time. That's pretty cool. Sternritter D, the Death Dealing, and my favourite of the Sternritter, Askin Naklavar, does use a bow. His bow is unique in that he can fire 2 arrows at once, and it takes on a cool, almost nodal design, which is clearly supposed to reference his scientific abilities. Bambietta Bastabine, Sternritter E, the Explode, does not use a bow, and she is the only Fenritter in the series to not use one. Sternritter F, the Fear As Not, also doesn't use a bow. Instead, he summons his own thorns in a ring around his body. While these can probably be attributed to be his arrows, he doesn't actually use a bow. Sternritter G, the Glutton, Lil Toto Lamper, does use a bow, and her arrowheads take the form of little snapping mouths. Sternritter H, the Heat Basby, does use a bow. In fact, he uses a small hand crossbow, which actually looks pretty badass. Sternritter I, the Iron Kangdu, definitely doesn't use a bow. He's a hand-to-hand combatant primarily, and he actually has a pair of Wolverine claws. Now, Sternritter J, the Jail Kurge OP, is a bit of a weird one. He doesn't appear to use a bow at first glance. He uses a saber instead. But when he holds the blade out, it seems to form a bow, almost like a string of arrows that come off the side of the sword and fire forwards. So whether you can call this one a bow or not, to be honest, is entirely up to your own interpretation. Sternritter K, BG9, doesn't appear to use a bow, but he does have a pretty sweet Gatling gun instead. I'd say that's a pretty cool trade-off. Sternritter L, the Love, Pepe Wakabrada, does actually use a bow, which makes a lot of sense considering his entire character is themed around Cupid. Rather disgustingly though, he pulls the entire thing out of his mouth. That's kind of gross. Sternritter M, Gerard Valkyrie, the Miracle, one of the strongest Quincy in the army, does use a bow, but only once he's entered his Vorstendig, Ashtonig. He generates the bow with his actual arms themselves, summoning it on top of his hands, and it seems to be made purely of reishi. We never actually get to see him use it, but he does seem to also fire an arrow from the tip of his sword. Sternritter N, Robert Acatrone, is never seen using a bow. He just simply uses pistols instead. Sternritter O, the Overkill Driscoll Burst, he doesn't appear to use a bow, but he does summon massive, almost lance-like arrows by using the strange, they're almost like knuckle dusters on his hands, but not quite. He wears like these weird knuckle bracelets, and there might be a word for them, but I'm not entirely sure. But he doesn't use a bow. Sternritter P, the Power, Meninas McCallon, does use a bow. Fitting with her character, the arrowheads are shaped like hearts, and the whole bow looks rather cutesy. Sternritter Q, Berenice Gabrielli, the Question, maybe she uses a bow, but I don't believe so. We never actually get to see it. Much like Berenice, Sternritter R, the raw Jerome Guisbat, we have no idea if he had a bow or not, but I'm probably going to assume that he didn't. Sternritter S, Masked Masculine, the superstar, definitely doesn't use a bow. Much like Kangdu, he is very much in favour of being a hand-to-hand fighter. Sternritter T, Candice Catnip, the Thunderbolt, does actually use a bow, and much like the rest of the Femritters, it is themed on her abilities. The arrows themselves are like little lightning bolts, and the bow itself also appears to be a lightning bolt. Now, Sternritter U, the Underbelly Nananajakoop, is actually an example of a blink and you'll miss it bow user. When he hits Aizen with his Underbelly ability, you can see him holding a bow which he appears to have shot Aizen with. It's strange, it's serrated almost, it looks almost like a TV aerial, but he's definitely using a bow. Sternritter V, the Visionary Gremmy Thamo, definitely doesn't use a bow and has no real need to either. He does seem to favour machine guns, however. Sternritter W, the Wind Nyanzol Wiesel, doesn't use a bow and doesn't do a whole lot of anything. Sternritter X, the X-Axis Lil Barrow, another member of Yuha's Schutzstaffel, doesn't technically use a bow. However, he does comment that his sniper rifle, Diagram, is his bow. And as he explicitly calls it that, I think we can give him this one. Sternritter Y, the Yourself Lloyd and Royd Lloyd, definitely don't appear to use bows. And finally we have Sternritter Z, the Zombie Giselle Jewel. Another Femritter means another bow and arrow user, and it's probably my favourite bow and arrow out of the four of them. Her bow takes the form of a few little bones, and the arrowheads are like little skulls. It's cute, if she wasn't so creepy. And that's it for our list of Sternritters, guys. I think quite a few of them do actually use bows. It seems to be nearly a half and half split, but it looks like at least some of them haven't forgotten that their Quincy roots involve them being archers. That was the video, guys, just a short, quick one for you this time. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments below whether or not you knew all of these characters used bows, and if there were any you had missed, like Nanana, and if there were any of the Quincy's who didn't use bows that you would have liked to have seen them use one. Let me know in the comments below. But until next time, guys, see ya.